The birth of two legends. In the early 1960s, two bands emerged that would change the course of music history forever. The Beatles, with their harmonies and catchy tunes, quickly became the darlings of the British music scene. Just as the world was falling in love with them, another group was rising, one that would challenge everything the Beatles stood for, the Rolling Stones. While the Beatles embraced love, peace, and uplifting melodies, the Stones were gritty, raw, and rebellious. They weren't afraid to show the darker side of life, and that was exactly what made them stand out. Their sound was sharper, their attitude edgier, and their image completely different. This wasn't just about music. It was a clash of personalities, values, and visions. But it wasn't always a rivalry. In fact, in the beginning, they were close. Both bands respected each other, and there were times when members of the Beatles and the Stones would share a laugh or have a drink together. But the winds of change were blowing, and soon, the seeds of competition began to grow. The first signs of tension. The press played a huge part in the rivalry between the two bands. Every time one released a hit, the other was asked about it. The comparisons were inevitable, but it wasn't always taken well. The Beatles, with their clean-cut image and charming personalities, began to feel a little threatened by the Stones' raw power and rebellious edge. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were the perfect antithesis to John Lennon and Paul McCartney's polished public personas. But it wasn't just about music. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones had very different ideas about how to live life. The Beatles were known for their thoughtful introspection, often writing songs about love, peace, and hope. Meanwhile, the Stones were diving into the Messier side of existence, with songs about lust, heartbreak, and defiance. Their very lifestyles became a reflection of their music. As time went on, the pressure grew. The Beatles began to retreat into themselves, feeling the weight of their fame. The Stones, on the other hand, relished the chaos. Their confidence was growing, and they were more than ready to take on anyone, Beatles or not. The war of words. It wasn't long before the words started flying. In interviews, Lennon and McCartney took shots at the Stones, criticizing their music and image. But Mick Jagger and Keith Richards weren't ones to stay quiet for long. They fired back, calling the Beatles' music safe and accusing them of being too mainstream. The media ate it all up. Headlines screamed of a bitter rivalry, and fans started choosing sides. John Lennon, known for his quick wit, didn't hold back in interviews. He described the Rolling Stones as just a band with a few good songs. His words stung, and Jagger, never one to back down, called out Lennon's hypocrisy, accusing him of being too self-absorbed. The tensions were now fully on display. The competition wasn't just in interviews. The Beatles and the Stones were both vying for the same audiences, the same fame, and the same title of the greatest band in the world. It was clear that the rivalry wasn't going away anytime soon. A shift in the music scene. By the late 1960s, both bands had evolved musically. The Beatles had dived deep into the world of experimental rock with albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, pushing the boundaries of what music could be. Meanwhile, the Rolling Stones were embracing the blues with albums like Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed. It was no longer just about music. It was about creating art, shaping culture, and pushing the envelope of what was expected. But as the Beatles reached their creative peak, cracks started to show. The band's internal tensions were rising, and the rivalry with the Stones was a constant reminder of the pressure they were under. The Stones, meanwhile, thrived in this chaos. They had found their rhythm, and their bond was stronger than ever. The Rolling Stones were no longer just a band, they were a force. And this new energy only fueled the rivalry. As the Beatles began their decline, it was the Rolling Stones who were stepping up, ready to take their place at the top. The Beatles' breakup, the Stones' triumph. The Beatles' breakup in 1970 marked the end of an era. But for the Rolling Stones, it was just the beginning. Mick Jagger and the band had long since established themselves as the dominant force in rock and roll. With the Beatles out of the picture, the Stones were free to claim the title they had been fighting for all along. However, this victory was bittersweet. Despite all the public jabs, there was still a deep respect between the two bands. Lennon, before his tragic death, often spoke about how much he admired the Stones. Even Jagger, in his own way, acknowledged the Beatles' role in shaping music history. It was a rivalry that had been defined by competition, but also by admiration. By the 1970s, as both bands went their separate ways, the rivalry seemed to fade, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. The Beatles were gone, but the Stones were still rocking, still pushing boundaries, still proving that the spirit of rebellion and rock and roll was alive and well. The legacy of two icons. Today, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones are legends. Their rivalry, once so fierce, is now a part of rock history. But what did it really mean? Was it just about the music? Or was it about something deeper, the clash of ideals of what rock and roll was supposed to represent? The Beatles represented a time of optimism and change, of artistic growth and peaceful rebellion. The Rolling Stones, on the other hand, embodied the darker side of rock, raw, untamed, and always pushing the limits. Together, they defined an era. And in the end, it wasn't about who was better. It was about the mark both bands left on the world and how they forever changed the landscape of music and culture. Even today, the echoes of their rivalry resonate, reminding us that rock and roll isn't just about music, it's about attitude, spirit, and the way it makes us feel. So, was it truly a rivalry? Or was it just two forces pushing each other to greatness? The truth is, it was both. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones didn't just compete with each other. They pushed each other to be better, to go further, and to change the world. And in doing so, they created something timeless. This is the story of the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones, a story of competition, admiration, and, most importantly, the eternal spirit of rock and roll.